Yeah, so I'm just going to show a couple of slides just to talk a little bit about workflow. So, in general, this would be your standard workflow. You open the image, which is preferably a raw file. But interestingly, Lightroom also handles JPEGs and other types of files non-destructively. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a raw file. RAW just gives you extra headroom. And in general, we do go through top to bottom on the interface. So we do our color temperature adjustments, then we do our exposure adjustments, then we do tonal adjustments, and then more, if you like, more creative settings. But I'm slightly contradicting myself here, but in general, it's better that you do two or three things before you start doing the color temperature and the exposure. So the general things I would recommend doing are lens profile correction, which basically corrects any lens aberrations that you may have, any distortions and things like that. And then cropping, things like rotating and cropping so that you have the right, if you like, the right size, you know that the size that you're working to. And then once you do these two, then the major question you may have to ask yourself is, do I want a color or a black and white treatment? Um, then you might want to look at profiles and presets. Profile is a kind of higher level preset, which we also call, as you see on the screen there, LUT, a lookup table. So this kind of determines the look, the color look, a very small difference, but there is definitely a color difference depending on the profile that you use. Alternatively, in terms of profiles, you may want to use the profile that came straight out of your camera. So if you're liking the colors that your Nikon produces in terms of picture controls, those are emulated in the Adobe software. So if, for example, you use a Nikon standard picture control, it will appear here. If you use a Nikon Vivid or Nikon Landscape, it will appear here. So you can emulate the look coming out of your camera very easily. Presets, we're going to also look at. Presets are, again, combinations of settings, but they can also determine the look of your image. And one of the slight, uh, well, one of the new things that has appeared is this thing called, they're now adaptive profiles and adaptive presets. We'll look at this in more detail at the next session. But basically, adaptive means that the Adobe software is using some sort of AI to analyze the picture, and basically it doesn't apply the same settings throughout. It just basically analyzes the picture and gives you different settings according to each picture. Okay. Then vignetting, again, I put it here because it has an effect on the overall look. And once you've done that, then the essential settings, if you like, which is what we get in the basic panel, are the white balance, exposure, highlights, shadows, white and black. So those are the main features that determine the look of your picture. Okay. Now, again, in terms of exposure and automatic, we will look at this in more detail, but there is also an adaptive an adaptive profile that basically does this for you. We will look at this again in the next session. Okay. Tone curve is a way of bypassing all of these and doing these in more detail. We will look at this later on today. Okay. In terms of the creative workflow, so once we've done our basic adjustments and we're happy with the look of the image, then we can look at enhancement. We can look at going beyond, adding things like textures, um, adding things like clarity, which is a stronger, if you like, version of texture. You see there, texture enhances mid-frequency areas. Clarity is a stronger effect, which affects the midtones, much bolder. Then we have vibrance, which is a kind of smart tool. It only adjusts certain colors in moderation, but avoids touching the skin tones automatically. We have saturation, which determines the amount of color. We have color grading, which gives you more control over adjustments in terms of highlights, midtones, and shadows. We have a grain control, which sounds like, why would you want to add grain? But basically, it adds a sort of analogy feel to the image as if you were using film. Dehaze, a fantastic effect, which basically allows you to do things like add fog, add atmosphere to the images, add clouds, but it can also be used for removing haze, particularly if you're using longer telephoto lenses. Sharpening, we'll look at this in detail because it's a very important aspect of the program. And we'll also compare this with a denoise because denoise is all about removing noise in the picture, gives you a cleaner image to start with. But with sharpening and noise control, you can also make adjustments to the noise levels in the picture. Okay, and well, noise reduction I just discussed, basically useful for older images that you took with older cameras, and also for images that you've taken a very high ISO where there is obviously a little bit more noise than you have usually. Um, I'm just going to mention this quickly, but we will go through this in more detail on Thursday. But because of all the new AI features that have come into the program, if you're going to be doing denoise, because that affects the overall look of the image, the detail that's in the image, we have what I call the recommended artificial intelligence order of operations. If you don't do things in this order, what will happen is that you'll get uh, a little icon on the top left hand of the screen saying update AI settings. It will ask you to keep updating the image because if you like, the major operations that you're doing are stepping on each other, are affecting each other. So my recommendation, by far, it's best in terms of your workflow. The most important thing is you do the denoise first, okay? And then you do cropping and generative remove. This is the AI removal, lens blur, adaptive profile. We'll look at this in more detail later on, and any local masks, okay? Try and do things in this order. But this we will expand more uh, on Thursday. Okay. So I will get out of Keynote, and we have Lightroom already running here. And just a few general points. Very important. You see, I've already selected my XMP options here. And under preferences, I already have my defaults here of all my cameras, so all my cameras come through with the correct settings. Okay. So I've already inputted the images and I've already created a couple of collections, again, just so that I don't have to go looking for the images. They're all in the right order. And we also discussed that in the uh, in in the collection, we can also order our images the way we like. They can be in any order, and you see here I have a custom order. Okay. So I've selected an image, and then what we do is we click on the develop module on the top right here, develop. And this is what we get when we get into the develop module. Now, there are a number of similarities with library. So we spoke the other day about solo mode. So if you right click on any of the panels on the left or the right, okay, you get a pop-up window that determines which panels you want to show. If they have a check mark next to them, it means that they're on show. If you go to solo mode, it basically only shows one panel at any one time, which is useful if you're on a laptop and you have a limited screen size. Same on the right-hand side. So I've now moved to the right-hand side. If I right click, I have customize, develop panel, I have show all, I have solo mode, I have expand and collapse. So open all of them or collapse all of them. And if I click customize, develop panel, I get this. And not only does it allow me to switch on and off things that I don't want, but I can also change the order. So I can pick up something and move it someplace else, okay, if you want to. But in terms of today, we're going to keep to the default order. We're not going to change anything because we want to look at everything. Now, obviously in the middle, we have a big picture, which determines our, which shows us a view into our image. And a couple of tricks here. If you control click on the background, you get the option to change the color of the background. So you have a fairly limited range because ideally, if you had a color background, it would clash with the image and it won't help you very much if you're doing color correction. So the ideal choice would be to use one of the gray options, or you can use black if you like. But generally, a dark gray or a medium gray would be best. Okay. Now, the other thing that's useful is if you press the I button, I stands for information, and you get a panel of information on the top left-hand corner of the image. So this is the file name, when it was shot a long time ago, and this is the size. And if I press I again, it's basically showing me the lens that I used and exposure information. Okay. And if I click on the histogram here, this information is also shown here at the bottom of the histogram. So the ISO, millimeters, focal length, aperture, and shutter speed. What determines what information is shown here? If you go under view options, which was actually the same in the library module, but this is now develop view options. So this is loop info 1 and loop info 2. So this is 2 at the moment that's showing. So you determine um, what information you want to see in terms of info. Okay, that's how you show it. And if I press info again, it goes away. It goes away from the screen. Okay. Now, the first panel here is the navigator. This shows you an overall preview, if you like, of your picture. And we have the fit and fill. Fill fills it to the edges, but of course we can't see the whole image. Fit basically fits it to the available size. Okay. If you want to click to 100%, it's the middle one. So now we're looking at the picture at 100%, this depends obviously on the size and resolution of your screen. And then we can drag the window that we see on the left-hand side to see a specific part of our picture. Okay. On the right-hand side, we have different amounts of zoom, if you like. So this is 200% zoom, or 400, whatever, whatever. And this is going outside. So this is 25%. Okay, 100%. So a couple of useful tips, very useful tips, because you're going to be zooming in and out all of the time. If you move your cursor over the center of the image, press Shift, and you see the icon now? It shows me left and right. So if I click and go to the left, it's basically zooming out. If I go to the right, it's zooming in. Now, this picture was shot with my D300 long time ago. You can see that's typical noise levels of that kind of camera, which wouldn't be the same if you've had used a Z6 or a Z8. You would not have this sort of grain. Okay. Now, another useful feature is Command on the Mac, Control on Windows. If you press Command, the icon changes, and now I can zoom on a particular area. So I tell the program, I want you to zoom in there, right? Scroll. I want to zoom in there. Okay. And this is reflected again here. I can move the window to go to a particular place. Or if you just want to go back to where you started, you click on Fit or Fill. Okay. So those are very useful little tips for when you're in the main window. The next thing that we have here are our presets. So let's have a look at our presets. Let's close that for a moment. So user presets are things that presets that you have saved, and anything that you do in the develop module, as you shall see, you can actually save as a preset. Okay, so if you create your own treatments for images, you can save those as an individual presets. And you'll see here, I have some of my own of things that I've been working on. Don't worry about these for now. We will create our own presets later on. You can also download presets from various people on the internet, various photographers publish presets, and they will get installed. The way they would get installed is if you see here, there is a small plus mark with a pop down. When I click on it, it says create preset, import preset, manage presets. Okay. So this is how you manage what is in here. This is how you import, and they go on in a particular place on your disk. Okay. Now, adaptive, these are all the new stuff. And what happens with presets is if you've got a computer that's fast enough, because this is beginning to use quite a bit of computing power, if you roll over means just drag over, just put your mouse over. It will analyze the picture and it will show you the look. You see now it's detecting, you see on the screen, it's detecting and it's actually doing these things, right? But this is not a particularly fast computer, so it's going to struggle a little bit if we're doing rollovers. I spoke about this before. Adaptive and it's basically an AI analysis of the picture, and it's doing something automatically, as you can see here, enhancing portraits, um, enhancing eyes, enhancing teeth, and things like that. We have adaptive sky. I'm not going to do this now. Obviously, there's no sky in the subject in the picture. So all of these are for portraits. Then we have seasonal portraits. We presets. We have style presets. But let's just go down the list and see what else we've got. We've got black and white filters presets. We've got okay, so you just basically roll over to preview what the picture will look like. Now, The preview also works up here in the navigator. So if I roll over, let's try this. You see it's changing also the picture in the navigator. So this is a good way to kind of preview how the picture will look with the preset before you actually apply it, right? And if you actually do want to apply it, then you actually click, okay? And you'll see on the right-hand side, various settings have changed now because of that preset, okay? So roll over to preview, click to actually put um, that preset into effect. And I mentioned this before, there is no save in Lightroom, so you don't have to save everything. It's automatically keeping track of everything that you've done. So this is sepia, this is a split tone, selenium tone, okay? Um, if you want to go back to where you started, you can click on the right-hand side where we have a reset button, and this will take you back to the beginning. Okay, so reset restores the image to as it was imported. Okay, now one other thing to show you is we have an amount slider here. So this determines how much of that preset is applied, if you like. So if you want a more subtle effect, you go to the left, and now that's where you the same as when you started. If you want a stronger effect, you go to the right. So just bear that in mind that you can change the effect of that preset by using the slider, okay, which appears at the top. So that's also very, very useful to know that you can change the strength of each preset. Now here we have a way to find. So like in the library module, you just basically type if you can't remember where the filter is, because you might have a lot of filters, you might have a lot of presets, just type in there what you're looking for and it will find it for you. Okay. Now, I'll look at history first, and then we'll do snapshots. But history is it starts from importing the image, so that's when it was first imported, and these are all the things that we did to it. So every time you do something in Lightroom, so if I change, for example, the exposure, you'll see that the exposure is now listed here and we've got a setting. So everything that you do is automatically remembered, okay, and in history. And don't worry about this taking up space. It takes up almost no space because everything is effectively mathematically saved. So only the effects are being saved, not the image. So you don't have to worry about these taking up space. And if you do want to remove them, if you go over the checkbox here, if you see, when I roll over the X, it says clear all. You just click and it says clear all, and you can clear the history. But the main benefit of history is that you can step back. Okay, you can step back in time. So now I'm not clicking, I am rolling over. Okay, I'm rolling over each of these settings, each of these things that are done. And if you like to go back to a specific setting, you just basically click on it and you're there again. Okay, just click and you're back there again. If you right click on a particular item in history, we'll look at this later on, but there are two things that you can do. You can clear the history above this step. So if you like that particular moment in time of what you did, you just say clear, and now it's cleared the later history. Everything that I did after this step is saved. Okay. And the other thing that you can do, and obviously we haven't gone there yet, but because I'm showing you the panels in order, if you like this particular moment in time of what you've done, you can actually save it as a snapshot, which is the panel above. Okay. So the snapshots has a plus. You click on the plus and you have a dialog box appear, new snapshot. And I'm just going to call it version 1 and we create. So this is in effect saving the file. Okay, this is saving an instance of the file. The beauty of Lightroom Classic, which you cannot do in Photoshop, is you can save multiple snapshots and you can save multiple aliases, multiple versions of the same file, and none of them are actually saved on disk. They're all saved in the catalog. Okay, so this is a good way to compare different versions as you're editing. If you want for example, a black and white version, a color version, you can create a black and white snapshot. You can create a color snapshot. Okay. So that's the difference between snapshots and history. Here we have our collections. This is basically the same as we have in the library. And I have my collection of images with 30 images. This is again for simplicity's sake, so I don't have to open my whole library, because if you don't put things, like I said to you, in collections, then everything in your library will appear on the film strip at the bottom, right? Which you don't want, because then you'd have to go back to the library to find your images. So the film strip here now shows me there are 30 images in my collection and they're all here, right? So that's the benefit. And if you had done ratings like we did the other day, then you can turn on filters here and you can filter that data. You switch this on, you can create a filter and you say, okay, anything that's rated 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, just show me all the highest rated pictures. So again, you can drill down without going into the library. In this case, I haven't done that. So I've switched the toggle, that light switch on the right-hand side, so that all the images that are in my collection are shown. You can still go here and you can still reorder if you wanted to. So you can still click on images and reorder through here. And you can also multiple select images as well. So you can do things to multiple images at the same time. So if multiple images are selected and you make a change here, it will affect all of the images. So just be careful with that. There is also a sync button, which is here on the bottom right. I showed that to you in library. It works in the same way here. But basically, when you click on it, it has synchronized settings. And if you have a number of images selected, you select all of the aspects that you want, the treatments, everything that you might want to add to them. You can say check none or check all, or go individually and remove items that you don't want. And you click synchronize, and they get synchronized across, those settings get synchronized across all those images. Okay. So you could, with this light switch, turn on auto sync, and auto sync basically, whatever we do to one of these images will be reflected in the others. So I generally tell people to switch the auto sync off, because I have accidentally left it on and I was wondering what was going on. Okay, because unless your pictures are all exactly the same with similar settings, it's not going to work very well. Okay, so it's there, it's useful, but most of the time you want to keep that switched off. Okay. Now, let's go to the right-hand side. Oh, by the way, tab, like in the library module, removes the side panels. And you can also click on the arrows on the left and on the right to remove the side panels individually if you wanted to. These are the arrows that appear just right to the left of the screen here. Okay. Now, let's go to the right-hand side. I'm just going to close a couple of panels. Okay, so on the top right, we have our histogram. And our histogram is, people worry about the histogram. But basically, histogram just shows you the tonal values, the where, what basically the image is made out of in terms of information, in terms of color. And what's nice about this, and I don't know whether you can see it, but when I roll over, so not clicking, just dragging over, you see that I have blacks. You see, just look at the bottom here. It says blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, and whites. Okay. So the histogram is, this is the darker part of the image. This is the lighter part, and this is the middle of the image. And it's basically showing us how the tonal values are distributed. And this is the reason why we said when we spoke about cameras and acquisition of images, you want to try and have as wide a histogram as possible. If you have an image like this, which is obviously not correctly exposed, it's a little bit underexposed, our tonal values are different, and we have gaps to the left and to the right because there's nothing that's really white, there's nothing that's really dark. Okay. But of course, we can fix that in post. But ideally, your histogram should have a nice broad pattern with an even distribution, nothing peaking too much to the top, which means that we have truncation of data, loss of data, and we don't want a histogram that's bunched to the left or bunched to the right. Nice, even spread. Now, one of the interesting things, and this is a nice little tip that most of you probably don't know that it's possible, but you see when I move my cursor over, it has a left and a right arrow, but you can actually adjust the exposure by shifting to the left and to the right. So I'm shifting all the midtone data to the right, and you see we're overexposing. And if I move it to the left, I am underexposing. Okay, so the image begins to be too dark. So it's not a very accurate way of doing things, but it's a visual way of doing things. But you can do that now. I'm doing it to the shadows. If you look at the image on the in the middle, let's go to 100%, or maybe let's go to 66%. Maybe that's a bit better. But now I am doing shadows. And of course, one of the things that happened, particularly with old cameras, is if you pull up the shadows too much, we get noise in the shadows, as we can see in the girl's hair. Okay. So obviously that's not very good. Okay. So here we have the blacks. So now I'm affecting the blacks. And on the right-hand side, I'm affecting the whites. You see the milk bottle there is getting brighter. And here I have the highlights. So it's basically segmenting the image and allows you to visually affect the picture. Okay. Now, on the top left and on the top right, we have two little triangles, which basically warn us of underexposure and overexposure. But they're more important than that because if I roll over, you notice that the girl's hair is going blue. Yeah. And if I go on the right, if I go over the icon, the triangle on the right, we have this red mark appearing in the picture. Basically, what this is showing us is that this is the places where we have solid blacks. So there's no basically detail there because it's black. And this is giving us a warning that those areas are severely overexposed and they are outside the current gamut. So they're a little bit overcooked, if you like. And if you really overcook, you'll see that it's gotten more white, because white basically means that there's no detail there. Basically, everything is gone. It's completely gone. It's overexposed. You've overexposed it. There's nothing that can be done to recover the data. So this is obviously a bad thing. If you were to print it, there will be nothing printed in that part of the image at all. Now, these little checkboxes, you can click on them and you can keep them switched on if you want all the time, so you don't have to roll over, or you can just click on them as you need. But obviously, the proof is in the pudding, so you can visually see, particularly if you're a seasoned Photoshop or Lightroom user, you can visually see whether the image is correctly exposed or not. Okay. Now, underneath here, we have our main tools. We're going to be using these a lot. So we have our edit tools, we have our crop tools, we have our remove tools, we have a tool for removing red eye, and also happens to have a pet eye removal. And here we have our masking tools as well. So these are the four different elements you're going to be, well, five, but the red eye, I imagine you rarely use. So these are the main kind of tools that we will be using in the software. Now, you notice that most panels have an eye on the left-hand side. Yeah, the eye basically determines whether if it's grayed out, like here, it means that you've actually haven't used that particular panel at all, so it's grayed out. If the eye is white, it means that that's the active um, panel at any one time. And if you click on it, you see there's a little checkbox there, which basically removes those effects from the image. So you can see what you've done basically by clicking on that eye. Very, very occasionally, you may see a red dot or even a red eye. That basically means that you need to update the AI settings, which was the thing that we spoke about earlier. Something needs to be updated for the program to work correctly. Okay. Now, the basic panel is where most of the important stuff lies. And let's just look at this in detail now. At the top, we have the important treatment, which is, do you want a color image and you want to try the automatic setting? Do you want to make this black and white or HDR? HDR is high dynamic range. I will look at this in more detail on Thursday because it's a new feature. Okay. Hopefully you may have a HDR display in the future so that you can actually see what the HDR images look like, but this will emulate what HDR looks like on a standard dynamic range screen, which is what we're using now. Okay. So I'll look at this in a moment, but let's look at profiles for now. So when I click on profile, I get this. And these are, if you like, my favorite profiles. So I mentioned profiles when we started. So profiles basically determine the look of your picture, and they are a higher form of preset. They are a type of preset, but they determine the color values in the image. So they determine the lookup table. Okay. Now, I said to you that there is a new option called adaptive, which is an AI-powered option, but we're not going to be really using that today. We're going to be doing that on Thursday because it's, again, one of the new features. So the main issue for you is whether you want to use your camera standard. So this is basically if you use the Nikon picture controller on your camera and you want to emulate how the picture looked on camera, then you want to use that profile. Or alternatively, you can go into using the Adobe standard profiles, which are, generally speaking, it would be Adobe standard or Adobe color. Okay. So you can see Adobe color is a little bit more saturated. Let's just compare. This is Adobe landscape. This is Adobe neutral. Everything is neutral. We have Adobe portrait. We have Adobe vivid. Okay. So this is probably quite a difficult decision to make, but my recommendations would be to start off with either a picture, the same profile as you have picture control on your camera, or alternatively use Adobe Standard or Adobe Color. Okay. Now, what determines what shows up in this profile pop-up? You see on the right-hand side, there are four little icons here for, yeah, so this is the profile browser. So when I click the profile browser, I get this, and now I can actually see all of the different profiles in this view. So we have these are the camera matching. So this is Nikon landscape, Nikon neutral, Nikon portrait. And what you'll notice is that on the top right of each icon, there is a star. Okay. That basically means that it's a favorite. Okay. So if you want to add a profile to that pop-up so that you don't have to look for it in here, you just basically just click on it here. So click on it in the image, and then it will become it will become show that little pop-up. Okay. Now for every profile, as we can see, there is also the slider, right? And if the slider is grayed out, it means that there's no you're not able to change the value of that basically profile. But like we did with the presets, right? And we have to go to another type of profile for this to show. But basically, you see now it's actually active. So if it's not available, it basically means that that profile cannot be adjusted. Okay. But if you click on a profile and you do see that available, then it means that you can change the effect of that profile by using the slider. So less of it, more of it. Okay. So that's what profiles are about. They are high-level presets, and I don't want to use Adobe Adaptive Color. We'll use Adobe Standard. Um, Basically determines what shows up in this pop-up here. Okay, and generally speaking, if you are working on a project or this is a group of images, obviously you will want to keep to the same profile. There is no point shifting from one profile to the other. So choose at the beginning which profile you're going to use and just stay with it. Okay. So that's profiles. Now, because we did various things and we added presets, and because this came with the preset that we chose, which is camera settings. So basically, the software is emulating what we had on our Nikon camera to start with. Okay. But what I'm going to do, um, in effect, starting from scratch, is when I double click on the name of a panel or on a section of sliders, basically it resets them to zero. So we start from zero. We start from the beginning. Okay. So let's look at white balance to start off with. and then we'll look at what all of these do. So white balance is basically the color of the light. Okay, so the defines in Kelvin the color temperature, and we have a pop-up here which has all of the presets. So it has the daylight preset, which would be something like 6,300 Kelvin. We have a cloudy setting, which would be like 5,000 Kelvin. We have shade, tungsten, which is about 4,000, fluorescent, flash, and custom. So this is basically as the picture was shot, okay, which may be correct, may not be correct. So you can change the white balance by dragging this. So that's 40,000 Kelvin. That's obviously very blue. So you can basically do it by eye. Okay, so you can determine what is the right white balance that way. Or you can click on this color picker. So this is this little dock here with the color picker. When I click on the color picker, I can go to a specific part of the image and choose a white balance. Okay. So obviously, if you choose weird colors, you're going to get a very weird white balance. Okay, because that's not what works. So what you need to do is you need to pick up a neutral color, a neutral gray, or a neutral white. Okay, so we'll try a couple of things and we'll see the differences. So here, this is kind of yellowish gray, but it's doing quite a good job. So this is like 2,500 Kelvin. If you go to an area which is too bright, it may not work. If we go to a little bit lower in the image where we have more gray, again, we have a slightly warmer result, as you can see. But yes, so something like this would work. So on the milk bottle, see slightly redder result. This is a slightly yellower result. So we know that somewhere in between those, we'll have a good result. Okay. There's no there's no right or wrong with white balance. And generally speaking, I mean, if there is a color cast, you can correct it, but you may override it to make the picture look warmer or bluer. So if you want to make it, if it's a freezing landscape, you might go bluer because it makes it colder. But if it's a portrait like this, you may want to go a bit warmer because it's more pleasing to have warmer skin tones than to have neutral skin tones. Now, the other control here is tint. So the tint is effectively a fine-tuning control, which basically makes adjustments towards the green or the other way towards the red. Okay. So ideally, you would want to keep it on 0, but just use that for fine tuning. So the most important thing is that you do the color temperature first and then you do the tint. Okay. So if we're finding that this picture is a little bit yellowish, we go a little bit to the red. And as you can see, that begins to neutralize the radiator here. It begins to neutralize the colors, but I'm doing this in moderation. If I go too much, then the picture turns a sort of purpley red. Okay. And you notice that because I have altered the settings myself, now it's showing custom because we have a custom white balance. Okay. So now, as a final thing, just before our break, let me see here also, how do you get the history back? Well, if you cleared it, you can't. So my advice is don't clear the history, just leave it. It doesn't take up any space. It's absolutely fine to leave it. Can you bypass profiles? No, every image has to have a profile assigned to it for the software to work correctly. So you have to have a profile. So if you don't like what the profiles do, just choose a neutral profile, um, and that will give you more neutral colors than one of the other profiles. Okay. So the main part of the panel here has exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, all of these things. And one of the nice things is, I don't know whether you can see this, but as I roll over, as I move over, you see the histogram at the top. Can you see the histogram at the top is also highlighted? So as I do exposure, if I click on exposure, you see this middle part is also shown. And in the same way, if I roll over the histogram, you see it's showing you the equivalent down here as well. Okay. So if you are a seasoned Lightroom Classic photographer, what you would do is you would try and do these by yourself. So you would adjust each one and look at the picture and say, yeah, okay, that's approximately what I want. And highlights, I will explain what these do in a moment. Highlights, shadows, maybe we want to boost them a little bit, and then we do the whites, and then we do the blacks. So something like this would be typically what you have. But as you can see, it's actually very difficult to do this because the values affect each other, so they're relative. Doing one thing affects the others. And also, how do you know what's right and what's wrong? It's very difficult. Okay, so let's just reset this, or we double click on tone just to put those back to 0. And I'll show you basically what you can do and how you can do it. So if you are not sure what to do, or if you are in a hurry, then my recommendation is to do automatic. So you see there is an automatic button at the top. You click on automatic and that evaluates the image. Now, 6, 7 years ago, this wasn't particularly good, but I have to say for 95% of pictures, it's going to give you a very, very good result, okay? Because it analyzes the picture. It's going to apply different settings for each picture if you do a number at the same time. But basically, these are the recommendations. Okay, so let's just discuss each one of these individually. So exposure, it's as if you were using your camera exposure. So one f-stop above the recommended is the same as putting this on to +1. So that would be one f-stop above. That would be two f-stops above. This is -2, -3, etc. So it is exactly working as your camera. Yeah. Now, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Contrast. So contrast is basically mid tones, and contrast is something that you should use in moderation. You should be very careful with contrast because you probably do not want to lower the contrast too much because you end up with a uh, really very flat picture. If you boost the contrast too much, basically you are losing information in the midtones because the contrast basically data is basically getting bunched up. So normally contrast maybe something like 10 or 20, something like that would be fine. It just gives it the image a little bit of a boost, but it's not too much. Now, highlights and shadows, what are they? So this is a kind of mask, but not a proper mask. But basically, it's looking at all the values that are high, which are this range here, this area here, and basically lowering the value. So in effect, you are decreasing the values of parts of the image that are bright. Basically, it's toning down the areas that are bright. And in the same way, shadows is just boosting the areas that are very, very dark in the image. So it's a boost on the shadows. Generally speaking, on digital camera images, there is more boost available for the shadow than for highlight. So this is another reason why you don't want to overexpose. Try to correctly expose. You can underexpose and you can bring up the shadow detail, but if you overexpose too much, you won't be able to recover the data. Okay. So highlights basically tones down the highlights, shadows boosts the shadows, but you can also go the other way. You can make the shadows darker if you wanted to, but generally speaking, in most cases, you'll be boosting the shadows. If you boost the shadows too much, you create noise because you see the noise that's inherent in that original photograph. Now, whites and blacks, very, very important. So this is setting the what's called the white point and also setting the black point. Okay, so what are these things? So white point is the point at which the picture has white data. So the picture where white begins to clip, which basically means that you have areas that have no detail whatsoever. So it's effectively what's called the white clipping point. Okay. If you did levels in Photoshop, you would get a levels chart and you would effectively trim the histogram to the white and the black. This is effectively what we're doing here. So this is picking up the white point, which would most images appear somewhere here. And this is picking the black point, which is where the picture goes completely black, solid black, and there's no detail whatsoever. Now, the white point is much more important than the black point, because you might have a picture which is inherently dark and black, right, with no detail, which is fine. But so the black you can use much more, but the white is the more critical one because you don't want to overdo it, the white one. So the white is a little bit more critical than the black. Okay. Now, we have used the automatic, but what we could do, let me just reset this again. And what you can do is if you click on the shift button and click on individual sliders, you are basically telling it, give me the automatic setting just for this slider. Okay. So I'm holding the shift and double clicking, and this is chosen highlights -58. So shift shadows, shift whites is going to choose my white point, and shift blacks is going to choose my black point. Okay, so that's a very useful tip. Generally speaking, you would want to use exposure and starting with whites and blacks before doing anything. That's a better way of starting because that sets the white point, that sets the black point, it sets the limits of that image, and then you can go on and do shadows, highlights. Now, let's just have a look at these little check marks that we discussed at the beginning. Now, you can have them on all of the time. So when they're on, basically, as you make your transformations here, you see when I go to the right, I am overexposing, and when I have too much overexposure, the red warning comes up to show you that you've got way too much light there and there's no detail there. Okay, so that's what keeping the red warning light on, that's what it's for. If I go down the other way, basically I am underexposing, severely underexposing, and what that blue is showing there is that basically that is devoid of any detail, that's solid black. Okay, so those little warnings, those check marks are very, very useful to show you that you're not overcooking the picture. Okay, now once you start using Lightroom, you probably would not want to have these on all of the time. But what happens is if you click on the Option key, you have a preview of all of those things actually on the screen. So you have a different preview. So when I'm clicking on shadows now, it's basically showing me a preview of the areas which are becoming solid black. Okay. So whites. Okay. This is the areas that are beginning to be solid white. Okay. So these are the areas that we're overcooking, right? And the same with black. If you keep that down, right, the Option key and Alt on Windows just it shows you a preview what's going on behind the scenes so that you can see what's going on. So in combination of those features, the Option key or the little warnings here and automatic, this is how you know that you've got a good exposure. Okay. That's effectively how it works. Okay. Right. Let's have a look at these as well, and then we'll have a break. So the presence panel here. So we have at the beginning, we have texture. Okay. So this is going to add a little bit of texture to the image. And again, you would not want this too much because you see the grain gets amplified if we do too much. So if we go the other way, we have a much softer picture, which is devoid of uh, any detail. Okay. So if you are going to add texture, you basically want to keep it to sort of 10, 15, something like that. This just basically makes the image a little bit punchier. It just builds up a little bit of mid-level contrast. Now, texture is also the feature that we use to soften skin. So if you were a portrait photographer and you shot various people and you basically want to smooth out skin blemishes, you would use texture because texture is a more subtle effect than clarity. Okay. Generally, all pictures benefit from a little bit of texture and a little bit of clarity, but again, you want to use these in moderation because this is what a lot of clarity does. It makes it look like a sort of sketch. And if you do too little clarity, you have a very soft looking picture as if it was shot through a screen. So little bit of clarity and a little bit of texture. Dehaze I'm going to look at later on. And let's just look at two other things, vibrance and saturation. So the saturation control basically looks after how saturated the colors are. So it's basically desaturating now. When I'm moving to the left, it's desaturating all the colors. And if you move it all the way to the left, the image is devoid of color. It becomes a black and white image. So no saturation is basically black and white. So saturation is an overall control that removes all of the color or boosts all of the color. But vibrance is a smart control which basically tries to keep the skin tones as much as it can without altering them. But what it's doing is it's evaluating bright parts of the picture, bright colors, and desaturating them, trying not to affect the skin tone. So this is what I'm doing now. I am going down, 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 and you can see it's trying to keep the skin tones intact as I'm reducing the saturation of those strong colors. And if you go the other way, Again, it's saturating the colors, tries to keep the skin tones intact, but obviously once you go to this level, it's affecting the skin tones as well. So vibrance, I would suggest use more of, because it's a subtler tool. And then you can use saturation if you want to add saturation universally. And let's just go to here and see. This is how we started. That was the beginning, and this is our end result. And because we've got texture and clarity, we've got a little bit of texture and a little bit of noise, as you can see. The color is more accurate. We're not overblown as we are here. And generally, the colors are more accurate on the right-hand side than they are on the left when we started. I showed you that you can enlarge these panels to a point, yeah? So that's where it stops, yeah? And on the left-hand side, you can enlarge it up to a point and then it stops. But I didn't know this. This is a new discovery for me. If you press the Option key or Alt on the PC, you can go as wide as you like, okay? Yes, you wouldn't want to have this big, but the nice thing that it does is basically a broader slider just gives you finer control. So that's what that's about. Okay, so Option, you can enlarge. Yeah, a couple of things that I didn't show you just in my notes. And preferences, I wanted to show you this as well. Preferences, uh, presets, you can locate presets by clicking under Preferences, Presets here, Show Lightroom Develop Presets, and Show All Lightroom Presets. So this will show you on the disk where your presets are actually stored. So you can manually make changes, but the best way that to remove things is via the interface that I showed you. So via here. So if I wanted to delete one of these, I just basically click on it and say delete, delete, and that will delete that preset from the user presets. Okay. So you have a full interface for managing presets. One other thing as well, preferences, performance. There is an option here under develop, which says enable hover preview of presets, history, and snapshots. So if you've got a fast enough computer, I recommend keeping that on, because the hover is the what I call the rollover. When you hover over a preset, it's showing you the effect of what it is without you having to click on it. So it's a useful thing have to have on. Okay. Now, let's just do a couple of more examples just so that you can get an idea of fit, how this works. So here we have a doorway. Um, this is obviously overexposed, which is what would happen in real life because we've got a very bright exterior. We have a very dark interior. If we do automatic, right? What it's going to do, well, it hasn't changed very much, which is good, but we've got a little bit of a darker exposure because we can see the outside a little bit better, and it's obviously boosted the shadows of the interior. But depending on what you'd like to do, I mean, we might have a more moody picture by going underexpose, and now we can see more of the outside exposure. So you can see this better without it being blown. But we see because we have our shadow control, I can still determine how the interior gets lit by my shadow control, and also the blacks as well. The blacks will have an effect on it. as well. And the whites will also affect the outside. In the same way, I mean, a very extreme example, I showed this the other day. So this is an event that I photographed. This is Grayson Perry at the Royal Festival Hall. And because if I shoot with matrix metering here with normal settings, what the camera sees is it sees a very dark hole, right? And the speaker, because they have a spotlight on them, will be overexposed because it's going to give me an overall exposure for the Royal Festival Hall, for the auditorium. But where Grayson Perry is, he will be overblown. So what I do in this situation is I severely underexpose because I want the exposure to be correct on the speaker, not the auditorium. But what would happen now is, and we'll do it ourselves first, and then we'll try. When I build up the exposure, you see, you begin to see this is brighter than it was at the time. Okay, but because I've got this leeway over the underexposed parts, you see, I can expose the auditorium as if it was lit properly, right? And now what I want to do is because I've got the speaker overexposed, then I can go on highlights and I can determine the highlights on him are actually correct. So I've got correct exposure on him. Okay. And now I can press shift and say, okay, what do you think the correct white point is, and what is the correct black point? Something like that. And I've got in an amazing picture, which is not what it looked like to the naked eye or to the camera at the time, because we have this leeway to adjust the exposure. Okay. If we put everything to 0, let's see what the automatic setting will do. The automatic setting will do that, which is actually truer to what it was than my settings. Okay, but that's the decision sometimes in a tricky situation that you need to make to give you the headroom to be able to edit the picture. And notice the weird histogram as well. Yeah. If I boost the exposure, you see my histogram begins to take a more normal form. But what the histogram is telling me is that we have a very dark picture here. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that, that's how that particular picture was shot. This picture also happens to be extremely noisy because it was shot at a very, very high ISO. 1600 with a camera at the time, so not great compared to today's cameras. But again, we've got that denoise. We've got the ability to denoise. So if I zoom in, you'll see the noise. And noise again is not necessarily a bad thing because it's grain and it gives the picture its feeling. It's not necessarily something that is very bad or something that you might want to get rid of completely. But if I go to denoise and denoise this, it's gonna really get rid of this speckled noise that you see, and it's going to give us a very clean picture. Um, and it's remarkable because this didn't exist when I actually took this picture. Okay, let's fit again, and we'll just look at a couple of other examples. So I'll do automatic here to start with, and then we'll look at dehaze. So this is the island of Hydra in Greece. This is a place where we sometimes go for a holiday. And because it's summertime, it's extremely hazy, as you can see. We have, and this is what the town of Hydra looks like from the other side, from mainland Greece. And dehaze is very, very useful. If you go on the left, it adds fog. Basically, if you go to the right, it basically removes the haze. Okay, so you have a nice clean image. Now it because of the way it works, it does give you a boost on saturation. So you might want to um, you know, remove a little bit of saturation to get rid of that color. Okay. Unfortunately, dehaze also shows where you've got dust on your sensor. Okay, so that's a very nice little dust spot there. But don't worry about dust spots because we have the remove tool and we can very easily remove it. Not a big problem. Now, when dehaze, because of my relationship with Adobe, I get to test things and I get to see things before they get released. And when we took pictures from the shard, we had a walk basically, and I took these pictures. And what I did was I dehazed them. So, and everybody was saying to me, how did you do that? How did you manage to get pictures that are so crisp and clean with your little camera? Because I think this was a Nikon 1 or something. Uh, yeah, it was a Nikon 1 camera with a one Nikon VR 10 to 100. And they said to me, with that little camera, how did you get these crisp, clear pictures of London? And I said, well, it's something that's coming, and this is dehaze. So if you have um, situations like this, London on a foggy day, and as you go in the distance, of course, you have atmospheric haze. It's totally natural. You can use dehaze to remove it. Okay. If you want to make it very foggy, you go the other way. That's London on a foggy day. In fact, on our last walk, we went on one of the skyscrapers in London, and it was like that. Actually, it was white because there were low clouds and we couldn't see a thing. But basically, dehaze is your tool. And if you uh, use it a lot, just remember to either use vibrance, go down on vibrance, or on saturation just to desaturate the colors a little bit. Okay. Now, I want to specifically use a picture which is a low contrast picture like this one. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the tone curves. Okay. Now, let's start with automatic. And I'm just going to put these to 0 for now, just to show you a couple of things. 0 and 0 and 0. Okay, tone curve. So in terms of the tone curve, we have a number of options. We have the first curve is called the parametric curve. The second one is the tone curve. And then we have red, green, and blue channels. Now, this one is the simplest, but what this does, and what I would recommend if you're going to use this curve, is I would recommend that you set the white and the black point before you use the parametric curve. Okay. And the reason is because the histogram, as we saw it before, wasn't filling the available data, the available space that we have of values. So for the parametric curve to work properly, um, you should basically set the white and the black points. Okay. Now, my recommendation would be to zero the highlights and the shadows, because what this does is it breaks down the highlights and shadows into 4 elements. So it breaks it down into highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. So effectively, it gives you a little bit more control over the highlights and the shadows than you had in the basic panel. Now, I would say for most of your images, you wouldn't probably go into the tone curve, right? What's in the basic panel is enough in terms of highlights and shadows, but this just gives you a little bit of extra control, if you like. And the way this works is if you want to boost a particular part of the picture, you can either use the slider. So we've got highlights here. So if I do highlights, you see it's affecting that part of the curve up here. If I'm changing the lights, right, it's affecting a more central part of the curve. If we've got darks, it's affecting the darks, and if we've got shadows, it's affecting the other part. And these are also reflected, these four regions that you see here. This is shadows, this is darks, this is lights, and this is highlights. Okay. So if you wanted to, these are the boundaries basically. So value 25, 50, 75. These are the four quadrants into which these sliders are in effect. And if you want to make a broader change, because you are limited by obviously those bounding triangles, you basically widen it by doing that. Okay. So now I have a broader range of values that work for that particular change in the lights area. Okay. And you notice that uh, I'm only allowed to change the curve in a particular way. I'm not allowed to add points to the curve. I'm not allowed to limit the curve in any way. It's always starting from that point and that point. And this is the reason why I suggested that you choose the white point and the black point, because if you hadn't done that, then we have a smaller histogram and we have a range of values that would have no effect at all. But basically, by setting the white and the black point as a starting point, it's basically given us a broader histogram and it's filled in all of the values that can be adjusted. Okay. Now I'm going to reset this. We reset it to as it was before. And we're going to look at this this curve. And now it's not as important to do the whites and the blacks. Why? Because when you've got the tonal curve, you see now you can make that same adjustment. So I'm going to do white point and black point just by using the graph here. So because there's no values here at all, you see, you basically do that. So it would be something like that. And we have the same result because we are effectively changing the white point and the black point. Okay. Now, the difference with this particular uh, curve is that we can add points to it. And those points you can also move along the line. So if you basically want to make a change onto the midtones of the image, right, what you do is, and I made a little mistake there, so I want to delete that control point. I'll show you how you do that in a moment. So basically, by setting your points, you're basically giving it the limits. So if I want to change the midtone, the mid-level, if you like, of those, then I do it via changing that middle point between those 2 points. So basically, by adding points, you limit the range in which you want to work. And that's how you can make a change to the highlights, the shadows, the darks of the picture. Okay. Let's now to remove a control point or to reset the channel, we do this, but we can delete those control points, right? So by moving them around, you can determine how you want that curve to look. And typically, you'd have a kind of S curve that looks like this. You can add up to 16 points, something like that. I would also say do this in moderation, right? But effectively, what we're doing is we are boosting here the midtones. But if you add too many points, right, it begins to be difficult to control, right? So you want to add as few points as possible. But the trick, like I said, is if you set your control points to the areas defining the area that you want to change, then you just pick up the curve between those 2 points and you have a lesser effect onto the rest of the image than that particular area. Okay. Um, One other thing which we have done here is you notice that what you want to avoid basically is if the curve goes flat like this, right? Basically, there aren't enough colors, there isn't enough of a tonal range basically to build up the image. And that's why the image looks the way it does. So you definitely want to avoid the curve going flat like this. You want to have a gentle curve. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just reset this. You want to have a gentle curve, something like that, which boosts the blacks, increases the midtones possibly. And because I've got a point at the beginning and the end, you see, now I'm affecting the midtones of the image without affecting too much the highlights and the shadows. So this is a good way to go, but avoid having a flat curve because there isn't enough of a range to fix that problem. Okay. Now, you may have noticed as well that when we are boosting the curve, when we're boosting the values here, it saturates the color. We have an addition of saturation. So this slider underneath, which says refine sat, it's basically saturation. What that does is when I go down, you see it removes saturation. So as you can see, it's removing saturation from the image. Okay. Now, as with all things, if you finding that you're doing a particular custom curve and you really like the result and you want to do it on all your images, just go on this little pop-up here, save it, you save it and you save it into a preset and it will appear here. But we've got three standard curves, the linear, the medium contrast, and the strong contrast. Okay. Now, let me show you something else where you can go completely mad. Let's start with a linear curve. If you have what's called an inverted curve, like this, then you begin to have what are called solarization effects. So you can create a weird and wonderful effects just by inverting the curve. And then you can also have something completely mad, completely wild, but you can have any type of curve you like. So the tonal curve can be adjusted to your liking, and you can create solarization effects as if uh, as if you used in the old days solarized developer and fixer for your film. These were done in the darkroom manually 50, 60 years ago. But that's how you can do it. Just invert the curve and add whatever points you want to the curve to create the effect that you want. If you want to go back, you go to linear and you're back where you started. But remember, it's a good starting point to set your um, black point and white point before you start with. Now, the other thing is if you were working with negatives, Lightroom does not have an inversion command. So to invert a picture, what you do is you do this. You basically do an invert the curve, and that will invert your negative to a positive. Okay. That's how you do inversion. And finally, we have the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And this is useful for doing things like if you were scanning images, particularly negatives, and negatives have a weird color base, which is orangey colored. You basically use these channels to correct the image, but you would seldom use this, I would imagine, particularly if you're new to Lightroom. But basically, what this allows you to do is this affects the blue channel of the image. This affects the green channel of the image, right? Makes it more bluish green, more purple, and this is the red channel. So it's every digital image is RGB, so that gives you an RGB uh, graph, basically. But most of the time, I imagine you'd be using this curve or the parametric curve. Okay. Now, as we got this image up, let's do a couple of more things because I didn't show you this, and this is possibly a starting point. But right at the bottom here, we have a panel called calibration. And the important thing is this one, which is the version of the camera raw basically plugin that's in here. The camera raw is basically what's converting the data from the raw file into what you see on the screen. And if you have started using Lightroom now, it will automatically use the latest version of Camera Raw. But if you had used Lightroom in the past, you'll find that you may be using an earlier version, which is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But what you'll find is that the most recent processes are better. They do things in a better way. Uh, so one of the options that you have is to reprocess the image in a more recent process. And if this was done this was rendered in a previous version, you will get a warning triangle. And if you click on that triangle, you will update the process to the more recent. Okay. And these other controls are shadows, red primary, green primary. Basically, these controls are about how that conversion takes place within the raw engine, if you like, to render things on the screen. You would not normally need to change these, But this can be used, for example, to match different, if you use different cameras that have a slightly different way of seeing color, you could use these to match the cameras together. And you can, and some people do, they use these to basically make changes to the color of the image. So you can do it this way if you wanted to, but my recommendation is to do it in one of the other panels if you're not sure. Okay. But this is to do with the way Camera Raw works under the hood to convert the camera data in the file to something that you see on the screen. And that's calibration. Now, I mentioned this before that normally you would want to use crop before you do your editing. Yeah, because that would straighten the picture and you'd have also the correct crop. And that's a better way of doing things than doing exposure and then cropping. So let's just have a look at what we've got here. Now, the first thing, so I've clicked on this tool, which is crop overlay, or it's the key R on your keyboard. Now, this is showing aspect is original and the lock is locked, which means that the aspect ratio of this picture will always be locked now to 3:2, which is the aspect ratio most Nikon users use, 3:2 or 6:4. The second bit here is angle, and we can use this to rotate our picture. Okay. But there is another way. I'm going to undo this. If I click on this straighten tool, you see I bring it over the picture, right? And I click on the horizon and I drag a line across. And then when I let go, it straightens the picture. Okay. You might also want to try, there is an automatic control. I find that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Here, it's actually worked quite well. So there is an automatic control there. And you can also manually adjust the, manually adjust the angle. Now, if you want, right, you should be able to adjust the angle by putting your cursor over one of these. Here we go. So if you put your cursor over one of the angles, one of the corners, I was meant to say, you find that you've got a fine control and you can make fine adjustments to the angle of the picture that way by going to the edges. Okay. Now, because we've got okay. So the crop will be this. So these are the edges of the picture that we will lose if we were to crop it this way. So we can adjust the crop by adjusting the corners, or we can adjust the edges to whatever we like. And we move the picture by just going in the middle and just moving the picture to what we would like to see, enlarging the edges, and it's always constrained to because of that lock. Okay. Now, if I unlock it, I've unlocked the lock, as you can see. So now I am no longer constrained. Now I can have any aspect ratio I want. So if I just want the surface, or if I want a sort of widescreen view, right? And I want to adjust it slightly. There we go. That would be my crop. Okay. So if you take out the lock, basically you are unconstrained and you can have any kind of crop you like. Personally, I'm a big fan of standard sizes, so I like to use standard sizes if possible. And if you like to use certain sizes, then what you can do is go to a particular aspect ratio And now you see we've got 1:1, 4:5, 4:3, 16:9, 16:10. Or if you want, you can enter a custom aspect ratio and you can just insert it that way. So if you're finding that you want portrait, you basically press X on the keyboard, and now you've got a portrait orientation. It's 4:3, but it's portrait. If you press X again, it becomes landscape 4:3. That's what I couldn't remember. Okay. So again, other aspect ratios you could have, we go back to where we were before, 2:3, 5:7, 8.5:11, whatever you like. You've got custom crops. Okay. Now, what I'd like to show you, something, let me just straighten it. Yeah, so X is the key that changes it from portrait to landscape. Now, we've got under tools, we've got a tool overlay. And basically that tool overlay is this grid that's showing on the image. So you can have it on always show, auto show, or never show, but I've got it on always show. And under the crop guide overlay, we've got various options: grid, thirds, fifths, diagonal, center, golden ratio, golden spiral. And what we can do is we can cycle by pressing the O key. Okay. So if I press the O key, you'll see that I have all of those patterns overlaid onto the picture. So I think that this is a wonderful aid in composition, and I would all urge you to use this tool because I think it's a great way of working. Because you see, um, this is the one of the most useful ones is this one, which is the rule of thirds, which is where it helps you to position things in the picture so that you have the strongest possible composition. In fact, I'm going to go back to 2:4, 4:6, because I think it's a better aspect ratio, works much better for this particular image. Why? Because uh, with the rule of thirds, right? I'm saying, okay, this surfer is sitting in this position and this surfer is sitting in this position. And this is a good position for them to be in from a, it makes the picture stronger because of that. Now, I don't like these, but don't worry, we can remove them. And also, I find that this one is quite useful uh, for certain types of images, particularly architectural images, the golden spiral. Now, if you press, I think it's Shift O, yeah, so Shift O changes the position of the spiral on the screen, again, so that you can evaluate how things look. You have a useful composition. So you use this as a composition tool, but obviously once you finish cropping, this will not show anymore. Okay, so that's basically uh, the overlay. Shift O cycles, sorry, O cycles the different ones. Now, this is also possibly useful, but basically this is showing you all of the aspect ratios. If you were to crop the image to different aspect ratios, and this is determined by this. So if you go to choose aspect ratios, you can determine which ones show. So as you can see on the screen, we have some showing and some not showing. You can basically determine what the crop would be like if you were to choose those aspect ratios. Okay. And when you're finally done with your crop, you basically click close here. close, and that's your picture cropped. Again, the beauty of Lightroom is that it's not saving anything, it's just saving instructions. So if we look at the history, this is showing us in detail everything that we've done. Okay. So everything that you do is automatically saved. Now, I mentioned to you before, I'll just mention it again. My recommendation is to do two things. First, you do the crop. Okay, denoise, we said first if you want to denoise, then you can do a crop, then you do profile corrections, and then straightening, right? You should do things in that order, right? Because, or if you're going to straighten, you might want to do straighten and then crop, depending on whether the picture needs a lot of straightening. But we're going to have a look at those things now. Now with lens corrections. Now, what happens is that there is a database of lens profiles built into Lightroom. And when we enable the correction, you see what happens. The picture gets slightly undistorted, and also we have a vignette change because lenses add a bit of vignetting. Now, one thing to note, if you're using Nikon, the latest generation Z lenses, they have a built-in profile which is automatically applied. So you don't need to do any of this. You only need to do this with older type lenses, AFS lenses, or third-party lenses, which may not have profiles. Okay. So we also have the option to remove chromatic aberration. And you'll see when I click here, we have Nikon. All of these different makes of lens are available. This is the built-in database of Nikon lenses. As you can see, there's a lot of them. And this is a profile for remember the 35 1.8G. Yeah, very good lens at the time. Now, if we don't have a profile for whatever reason, you can also override this, right, with your own. So you can do custom, and you can change the distortion. As you can see, that image is slightly getting distorted there. You can change the distortion and the vignetting characteristic yourselves, okay? But generally speaking, you need to do automatic because that will automatically pick up the correct profile. Now, one of the things to bear in mind, if you're using fisheye lenses and you use a profile, well, what will happen is this. It will remove the fisheye distortion. Okay? So you may not want that. You may not want to get rid of the fisheye distortion. So bear that in mind. The other thing, let's go to 200% here, and you can see, particularly with fisheye lenses, we have something called chromatic aberration. Okay, and you can see those tend to take the form of a purple fringe or a green fringe. So if you click remove chromatic aberration, you see it miraculously goes away. Now, if you have lenses that you think it might be a fisheye, maybe some older lenses have chromatic aberration, see whether there's a profile. If there isn't a profile, you can remove the chromatic aberrations yourselves, okay? And the way you do that, I will show you, is if you go here on the manual section, there is a defringe section, okay? So what you do is you pick up this and you go to the purple fringe and you click to find the fringe, and you have certain parameters here that affect the hue. Okay, so you drag to the left or to the right and see what happens in the picture until that purple fringe goes away. Okay. Remember, if you're doing things for the web and you're saving the file to a small size, none of this will be visible. We're only seeing this because I've gone to quite a high magnification. The same way, we have a green fringe here. So I click on the color picker again, choose the green fringe, and there you see it's gone. So you can manually remove the fringe. Now, if for any reason, let's go back to fit. If for any reason you remove the vignetting or you want to add the vignetting or remove the vignetting, you've got a manual vignetting tool here. So this will add a vignette or remove a vignette, depending on which way you go. Okay. In the same way, we have a distortion control. Again, this is for manual adjustment of distortion. If you didn't have a profile, you could do it that way. It's not going to be as accurate as a profile, but it works that way. Now, what I'd like to show you is upright. Upright is now called transform. Okay, this is it, upright. We have a picture slightly wonky. So how can we fix it? Well, we could do level. So if you click level, it levels it automatically. If we click vertical, you see, because we are looking up, the verticals are not 100% straight. We do vertical. That actually hasn't done a great job, I have to say. But let me tell you one other thing which you should do, which I didn't do, is first of all, go to profile and enable profile corrections because that will give us a more accurate upright. So let's do that again. Level, right? Vertical. Well, it straightens certain verticals, or we can have a full, right? Full upright. So if you want to do it all in one go, try full and see whether that does a full correction. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work very well, but most times it's pretty good. So let's try it here. We do, first of all, we do lens corrections, don't forget. We do level, so that's leveled the horizon. Click on vertical, that's straightened the verticals as much as it can. And then we have full, which basically brings it as if we had shot it head on. Okay. So try the automated controls, see whether they work well for you, because then you don't have to use called the guided mode. So let me try now going to auto. You see, clicking on auto is very similar to full. It's done an auto correction there in one step. Okay. A couple of other things now. Instead of doing that, we're going to do what's called guided correction now. So when I click on guided, it's now inviting me to draw vertical or horizontal lines across this building. And obviously this is useful for architectural work. So let's try it. We draw a line and nothing happens because there's only one line. But when you draw a second line, it's going to start straightening the picture. Okay. And when we pick up now the verticals, because we can stop at any moment if we like what we're seeing, but once we start doing the vertical corrections, then we've got corrections of the verticals. Okay, and this is called upright. If you don't like the result, you can click on a specific line and delete it. So you can go click on the lines, delete them, and you can try straightening it another way by clicking on other verticals or horizontals, but you determine the what you want basically. I have to say, this is something that's very useful. I've shot, for example, portraits against the background, which was not straight because I'm using a slightly wide angle lens and my lens is not 100% level with the background. And this is a very useful tool for straightening things, for straightening portraits as well. So I use this all the time. So let's do another example here. We use guided. Pick up a horizontal, pick up another horizontal line, and it will straighten it. And then if you want, optionally choose a vertical and another vertical, and it will do it. It will level it as if you shot it head on. That's pretty cool, I think, and very, very nice way of working. And of course, and this is why I mentioned, if you're going to use this tool, then you're going to, because obviously we've lost some of the edges because of the distortion, you're going to want to crop this afterwards. So sometimes you do cropping after you use the guided tool. Okay, so that's that. Now let's have a look at let's do black and white, which I think is an important and we'll use, let's do this one. I think it will work in black and white. Incidentally, one of the things that I should have shown you and I didn't. Okay, let's do automatic. And we go to our lens corrections and we enable that as well. Now, if we go to the tone curve, something I didn't show you is this little tool here, right? When you bring that, this is called the targeted adjustment tool, and it's on the top left-hand corner. What this allows you to do is allows you to interactively change tonal values by just clicking within the picture. So this, you see it points up and down. So basically you look that when I'm going to the brighter parts of the picture, it's highlighting the brighter parts of the graph. If I go to the darker parts of the picture, it's showing the darker parts of the graph. So basically by making adjustments, right, you can make the adjustments directly onto the picture. So this is brightening the highlights there, the midtones. If I click on the face, that would be a mid-tone. If I click on a darker part, I can decide to make it darker or brighter. But you do that interactively, okay, by using the values within the picture. And some of the panels that we will look at next have this little thing on them, okay? Now, we made a change to the tone curve. So if you want to see what it looks like without, just click on the eye and it goes away. Okay, it goes away momentarily so you can compare. Okay. So let's now go to black and white. And to go to black and white, we click on black and white here at the top, and now it's converted the picture to black and white. And now the color panel has changed to being black and white. Now, what this has done by default, it's taken the values and converted them to black and white. So it's taken the color values and said, okay, this is the standard conversion, and I'm going to do everything the same. But if you wanted to try automatic, what automatic will do is it will evaluate the color values in the picture, and it will create what in most cases is a better black and white conversion than if you just did a straight conversion, because in this case it's analyzed the picture and it's said, okay, this will be a better conversion. Okay, so by default it will do a standard conversion, but you can try the automatic setting. Now, we can't actually see the colors in the picture, but what we can also do is we've got red, orange, yellow, all these different channels. We can drag these and we can see the effect of the color conversion to black and white by dragging the sliders for each color. Now remember, red, orange, yellow are mostly faces. So if I do these here, it will affect mostly the face, right? There's the skin tones. When we get to the blues and the greens, well, it will affect the military machinery behind the subject matters, the subjects. Okay. But again, we have the targeted adjustment tool, which is this thing on the left. If I click on this again, I have the option now to just go over the image and decide how those items get converted, right? Just by dragging interactively to the front or back or any of the elements of the picture. Okay. Now, the other thing that I like, although our lens profile correction may have removed the vignette, if we go to our effects panel, we have two things. We have post-crop vignetting and we have grain. Okay. So post-crop vignetting is called that because um, if you choose a vignette and if you subsequently crop it, it will still crop it to the edges of the crop. Okay, so you can crop really at any time and it will still retain that vignette. But we have a number of sliders here. So this does this type of reverse vignette, and we have, yeah. So and vignetting is nice because it basically focuses our eyes more to the subject matter. And if we have corners that are basically busy, it tucks in the corners, basically. It hides the corners so we can see the subjects a bit better. Now, the controls that you have here, at the top, we have three types of vignetting. So we have highlight priority, which is the one I prefer to use. But there is a color priority one, which is the next one, which protects the colors in the vignette. And this is more subtle than highlight priority. And we have something called paint overlay, which is like having a transparent black and white painting over the image. But generally speaking, I prefer highlight priority. Now, in terms of controls, I'm not going to do this in moderation, but you should do it in moderation. We have a midpoint slider, which affects the midpoint of the vignette, right? We have a roundness, which affects the roundness. So if I go to a full amount and with no feather, right? And now you can see the effect of the midpoint. Okay. Right. So roundness gives us a different shape. Okay. And feather gives us the soft edge that you see on the end so that we have a nice smooth gradation. Okay. But like I said, do this in moderation so that it doesn't look like there's too much vignetting. Finally, there is a highlight slider. This is basically modifying the slider, the highlights slightly, but you're not going to see a big difference here because it's already black and white and there aren't great highlights. But this will be very subtle. It does have a very small effect on the highlights. Okay. Now, grain, you wouldn't normally put grain on a picture, but if you like to have a sort of analogy feel, and there's been some surveys that say that if there is a grain in the picture that people like it more, but I'm not going to do this in moderation because I'm just going to demonstrate how it looks. So, but if you are going to use this again, be subtle, okay? So amount of grain, so that's huge amount. That's the size of grain. And that's the roughness of grain. So it can be like this if you wanted to. Don't recommend it. Right? Shift, zoom out a little bit so we can see. So something like that, something like that would be fine. It won't have a huge effect onto the picture. And this is our black and white picture. Okay. And what we can do now is let's say we like this particular situation. So let's just call it black and white. So we have a snapshot of this, so we can go back to it if we wanted to. And maybe I will create a preset that will save that look for other images. Okay. So I will call this black and white preset at the top, and you see it's going to go in my user presets. Now we have some important settings here. Auto settings, this is for the basic, exposure, highlights, shadows, whatever. And this is black and white mix. So this is basically the automatic black and white mix that I showed you. And then you determine whether all of these things that we've done are actually going to be applied to the image. We didn't do any color grading. We didn't do any detail. Um, I think we did lens corrections. Yeah. Okay. So we create and we save that as a preset. And now you'll see that in user presets, we have a black and white preset. Now I'm going to go beyond and I'm now going to show you the color grading panel. Now, this works on color images, of course, but also works on black and white if we want to add toning, if you want to basically add sepia tone, selenium type tones, and things like that. Now, if you want to make it slightly easier for yourselves, and if you want to add a global tone to everything in the image, then you basically go to the last one, the last panel, because we have three. We have shadows, we have midtones, we have highlights, and we have the global. And what happens is you drag, right? You drag across to choose the color, which is the hue, the color of the tone, and we want a nice sepia tone. Okay. And by going to the end, it's stronger, which is the saturation. And by going close to the center is less saturation. So going this direction is saturation. Going around is choosing the hue, which is the color. Okay. Let's undo that. And let's just look at doing it another way. So instead of a global here, now we've got three different um, color wheels, if you like, and we're adjusting all three. Okay. So this is effectively giving us potentially, if we wanted to, a different color for the highlights, a different color for the midtones, and a different color for the shadows. Okay. Now, this is slightly confusing, and I have to say, even I myself are confused about what effectively all these things do at the bottom. So I'm just going to read it from my notes. So adjusting the, well, let's do the toning first. So this is a mid-tone. Okay, so we choose a nice mid-tone, something like that, something like that. Now, this is a different tone if we wanted to for the shadows. So these are the darker parts of the picture. They can basically pick up a slightly different. So you see now the equipment at the back has a sort of bluish tone, slightly. Yeah. And then highlights, I don't have many highlights in this picture. So again, I'm gonna just choose something not very subtle to start with, but then I will choose something quite subtle. Now, using the eye, we can basically see the difference before and after, before and after. Yeah, this one, before and after, right? This one will be subtle, so there won't be a huge change. Before and after, right? And the blending at the bottom, an easy way to remember, and this is how I remember it, it's the interaction between these two, okay? So it's right underneath them. And it's basically adjust the amount of overlap between shadows and highlights. So if you go to the left, it's like that. If you go to the right, so this is, if you like, a bit more of that sepia tone. If you go to the right, it's a bit more of the shadow tone. So it adjusts between these two. And finally, we have a balance slider. This is not going to have a huge effect on this, but it balances the effects of the highlights, midtones, and shadows. So values greater than 0 will increase the effect, and values less than 0 will increase the effects of the shadows. So here we go more towards the shadows. Here we go more um, on highlights, highlights, shadows. Okay. Like I said before, you would use this in moderation. It can be useful if you have elements in the picture that can more easily be identifiable as mid-toned highlight shadows, then the toning can work really well. You can choose two totally different colors, but most of the time you would choose something like a sepia tone, something like that, or you can use this, and we will look at more examples on Thursday of using the color grading tool, because this kind of gives you more sort of, if you're using it on color images, it gives you sort of cinematic kind of look images. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another preset. And this time is going to be black and white and a tone and sepia. I'll put sepia tone preset. And the important thing now is that we also choose the color grading that we did. So color grading needs to be selected here, create. So because I've got now these presets, what we could do is I can now go to an image and let's um, let's select our presets. And there's a number of ways we can do this, but what we can do is click on our little paint tool here, and we go to settings. Yep. So settings, user presets, but we can do any one of our presets, but I'm going to choose first of all, my black and white preset. Okay. So what we should be able to do now is when I select that image, it's now done a black and white conversion with those settings automatically. Okay. And if we choose our sepia, black and white and sepia tone preset, and we select a particular picture, it's now done sepia tone on this picture. Yeah, we can do sepia tone on that. Okay. In the same way, if we find the original picture that we did, which is this one, we can also right click onto it and look at develop settings and say copy settings. And now it's going to show me this. And now I will choose if I want to, which settings I want to apply. And I say copy. and I can go to another image and I can say, right click again, develop settings, paste settings, and it will now convert that image with those settings. So as you can see, that one didn't work particularly well. But this is how you can copy settings. Obviously, if you've got similar images, it will work very well. But this is how you can create presets and apply the settings throughout. And of course, if you're in Develop and you have the picture, you can do what we did before. You can roll over our presets so that you can see what they look like before you have applied them. Okay, so this is a very, a very nice way of working. Now, if I bring that image back, let me find it. It was we can do something else now. We can now do a before and after. Okay. So let's zoom out a little bit to, I don't know, 66. No, let's go down a bit, 50%, 53%. Yeah, let's go something like that. Now this is a good way of combining history with this, which is the before and after window. So this is before, this is how we started, this is what we ended up with, okay? So what we could do now is we can go back through all of our steps. We can go through all the things that we've done, and the image on the right is basically showing um, our end result, but this is the rollover, right? Rollover is showing us what we did at every step. And what you could do is don't click, but what you can do is you can drag. See, I've dragged on the left-hand side. So you can compare a particular moment in history, right, with your final result just by going to the point and then dragging, don't click, and then dragging it over the image. Drag it over the image. That's when we did the really rough, yeah, that's when we changed the roughness, yeah. So the other way you can do this is right click and say copy history step settings to before. That's the same thing that what we're doing by dragging. So copy that step to before, okay? And if we really like that, if we really like that position, then we can, of course, save it as a snapshot, okay? But before and after gives us a number of ways to look at this. So you can look at it like that, you can look at it like that, you can look at it like that, and you can even swap the pictures around. Okay. And if for whatever reason you wanted to go back to our black and white state, we have saved a snapshot. So we've got that snapshot. When I click on that snapshot, it goes back to that particular position in time again when we saved it. So if you want to save at particular places, right, you can create a snapshot. Okay. Now, something else that is possible, and we can do this both in Develop and in the library. If I right click on the image, I can create a virtual copy. And what you'll see is the virtual copy has a little, I don't know whether you can see, has a sort of folded page corner on the left of it, bottom left-hand corner. See, it's got a page. So what I can do is I can go back to this and I can go back to my original. And now I have an original copy and I have a black and white copy. Okay. And if we go to the library, you'll see that there are two versions now. There is one, which is the original photo. You see here it says original photo. And here, right, although it says original photo, this is actually an alias because this has got the folded corner. So you can create as many aliases as you want. And this is another way of effectively saving an instance of a particular file. So you go photo, set copy as original. So now this one has become the original and this has become the alias, the color one. So you can reverse the alias from the master. Okay. Okay. Now I'd
Sorry,
like to,
I missed how
yes.
you created the alias. I blinked.
Okay. Basically, we'll do this in the library. So right click, create virtual copy. So there's a virtual copy of this. So if I want to create a virtual copy of this, I do create a virtual copy. And the virtual copy is identified by that small corner, that corner, you see that corner detail? This corner detail, these are aliases.
Thank you.
If I delete an alias, you get remove the selected virtual copy, remove from Lightroom. But if you try and delete an original, it will say, no, that's not the original. This is the original. I'm getting, yeah, that's the original. If you try and remove the original, it will say remove photo from Lightroom catalog. So this is a warning that if you lose that original, the aliases also will not work because they're aliases to the original. So the behavior will be different. Okay. Okay, let's just very quickly look at two things, which is sharpening, three things we haven't done, sharpening, printing, and the color mixer. Okay, so let's go to develop. Do automatic again. And we go to the color mixer. And what this will do, it will basically change the colors of the image as a global effect. And what we'll look at on Thursday is doing the effects just on a particular part of the image, not the whole image. So we have HSL, hue, saturation, and just looking at my notes here. Yeah, so hue, saturation, and luminance. So hue, it's the color, saturation is the strength of the effect, and luminance basically is how much of that effect is applicable, how much of that color is basically applicable. Okay. So let's, yeah, you can view it as individual hue or saturation or luminance, or you can do all where you get this panel, right? So let's just do hue for the moment, which is color, and then we will look at saturation and luminance, okay? So I know obviously that there's reds in this picture. So if I use the red slider, I am now changing the color of the reds. Okay. And if I do the yellows, I've got the yellows here because there are yellow chairs. And if I use the targeted adjustment tool, the same way I can click on a particular color and I make a change on that color just by dragging up or down. So I'm dragging up here and down, and you can see that these sliders are also moving along with it. If we want to change the saturation of a color, how much of that color there is, we just basically use the saturation section. And now when I'm dragging up, they're more saturated. When I'm dragging down, they're less saturated until to the point where there's no color at all. Okay. And now luminance, the luminosity of the color. How luminant is the color? Darker, brighter. Okay. Darker, darker, brighter. Okay. So that's basically the color mixer. But like I said, we'll look at how we can just change the table at the next session, because that's a slightly more complex workflow, because we need to create what's called a mask. Okay, so that's the color mixer. Now, what I'd like to do is do a section on sharpening, just to explain what sharpening is. Let's go to automatic, just to have a usual settings there. Now, when we go to, and let's do lens corrections, enable, and now we go to detail. Now, what's happening here is by default, there are really there's a level of sharpening which is applied to each image automatically by Lightroom Classic, and this is dependent on your camera model. And what the sharpening does, and this is called input sharpening, because it happens at the beginning of the process. So what sharpening is doing is basically looking at the lines in the picture and adding something to them, which basically makes the picture look sharper than it really is. Okay. Now, what this will generally tell us is that to really see what we're doing, we need to be at 100%. Okay. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do a before and after so that we can compare. Okay. So we'll look at another type of noise reduction in a moment, but let's just have a look at this with no sharpening applied, and we'll have a look at it with a lot of sharpening applied. So you see the other result of sharpening is that you end up with more noise in the picture. So this is why sharpening needs to be done in moderation. Okay. So generally, as Lightroom suggested, something like 30 would be a good starting point. And we have two other sliders, the radius and the detail. Okay. So the radius relates to how beyond that particular point that it's evaluating, the sharpening takes place. So I'm going to go all the way to the right. And again, you should see a difference between the left one with a little bit of sharpening and the sharper image on the on the right. Okay. Now, there's an additional tool which is masking, okay, which works similar to detail, but it's very, very slightly, very slightly different. Okay. So I'm just going to explain what these things do. So the detail and the masking sliders basically suppress sharpening along areas of lower contrast. So 100 is no suppression of noise, um, and 0 is full suppression of noise. Okay. The Now another thing that I'm going to show you is if we let me just put masking to 0, and I put this to I press the Option key or Alt on the PC. This is going to show us the effect of that detail slider on the picture. So these are the lines that it's identifying, right? Can you see that? Lines that it's identifying and the places where the sharpening will take effect. Because what effectively we want to do is if we, let's just do it at 100%, just so that you can see, if we apply it all the way, you see the whole picture is affected by that change, and we have sharpening throughout, right? If we bring it to the left, then we are suppressing that noise and we are just limiting the sharpening where we want it to on the lines of the face, right? Not on the skin. Okay. And it's the same with masking. If I press the Option key, we can actually see that this is applied throughout. So there's no noise suppression. If it's moving to the right, we have the noise suppression. So here we have the sharpening is applied on the lines that you can see, not in the black areas of the picture. Okay. So you see now the sharpening is applied here. That's the noise that you can see. Whereas if we go the other way, it's been applied over the whole picture, which you do not want. Okay. And what Adobe are recommending is you use the detail slider because it's a bolder effect for landscapes, and you use the masking for portraits. Okay. Now, like I said, this would normally be here, and this would normally be somewhere there. And that would be adding that sharpening to the edges of that photograph. Okay. Now let's just look at another example. We go to 100%. Well, we're already at 100%. Let's go to 300% so that you can see. So, so a typical photograph like this would have two kinds of problems. There will be luminance noise, which is the speckled effect that we see here, and we also have color noise. Okay, so I'll just put both sliders to 0 just so that you can see. Yeah. So the luminance noise reduction is affecting the grain. So the more I go to the right, you see that grain goes. If I put that to 0 and I go to color, and now I go to the right on color, you actually see that that color noise goes away. Left, there's color noise, and right, basically. So you want to go right until that color noise goes away. That's the point at which you stop. And there is a detail and a smoothness. Those are certain threshold values but what you'll find is that they have a very subtle effect onto the image, but not really have a huge amount of change. Now we've reduced the color noise. Now we want to reduce the luminance noise, and we go to the right. And as we go more to the right, you see all of the noise goes away, but we are starting to lose detail. Okay. So if we look at our speaker here, with low luminance, it's like this, but with high luminance, it's like this. Okay, so you want to do it up to the point where you start to have a little bit of a grain in the image. That's absolutely fine. Because remember that when that image is reduced with fit, then you're not going to see it because the pixels will clamp together. You won't see the noise. So leave it a little bit so that there is a bit of grain, because if you go too far on luminance reduction, the picture just won't look correct. You know, it would lack detail. It would lack grain. It would look like it would look totally rigid and with a sort of plastic-like quality, artificial quality. So you want to do these in moderation. Now, I'm showing you these so that you know what's there, but when you do denoise, you'll see that you probably won't have to touch those anymore, because the denoise algorithm is so good, it will create a separate file and it will get rid of all of that noise for you. So, but it's useful to know that these are there, because you can still apply manual noise reduction on top of a denoised image. So even if you use denoise, you can still do that on top. Okay. So even though it's 1 o'clock and we've slightly overrun, can I have another 5 minutes? Is that good for everybody? Just to show you just one other thing, which is printing, which we will cover the there is a print module, but now we're going to look at printing within Lightroom itself. So doesn't really matter which image we choose, but we're going to go. Actually, let's do the original that we chose, this picture, because I think this is a good example. Okay. Now, if we are printing an image, what we might want to do beforehand is to do a proof, which is to check whether that image will appear correctly on our chosen printer, on our chosen device. And there is a soft proofing option. I don't know whether you can see it here at the bottom left. So soft proofing. And once I click on soft proofing, um, under the histogram, I have a button which is created, which is called Create Proof Copy. So I click on Create Proof Copy. And what that's done is that it's created, if you look on bottom left here, it's created an alias of the original image. This is so that we can compare the original and the proof. Okay. Now, in our window here, in our panel, we have three things. We have the profile and we have the rendering intent. Okay, so under profile, what we want to do is we want to click on other. And what this will do is it will show us all the profiles, all the color profiles that are installed on our machine. Okay. So I have recently bought this Epson ET. It's an Eco Tank printer, and it came with these color profiles. So I'm going to select all of them. And also, I've been playing with some Permajet papers. So these are specialist papers. That's a glossy, that's an oyster. So I'm going to install all of them, and we don't want to include display profiles. Okay, so those now appear in our interface. So what we could do now is sorry, just one other thing. Intention. So the rendering intent, there are two options, perceptual or relative. And it tells you what it's going to do. So perceptual preserves the out of gamut detail, but may change in gamut colors. So basically, perceptual may not be the true colors, but basically it's trying to do a as photographic, if you like, a change from one profile to the other as it possibly can. But relative colorimetric stays truer to the colors as possible. So as you can see there, it says preserves color accuracy, but it could clip out of gamut colors. Okay, there shouldn't be a huge difference between the two. So what we can do now is we can choose our different papers. And if we have simulate paper and ink, we have a simulation of how the image will look when printed on our device. And we can also do a before and after. So it can show us, yeah, no, it won't be as big an effect with some papers as with others, right? Especially on glossy papers. But if we choose particularly fine art paper, which is matte, then we'll see that we have a change in the contrast here. It's not as dark, it's not as black. So this is what simulate paper and ink does. Okay. Now remember, this is just a simulation. It's not going to be 100% accurate. But this is how you soft proof in Lightroom. And one other thing to show you is if I just go to this view, here on the left and on the right, we have again two warning buttons. One, basically, this one is the monitor. So this is basically saying that these colors are not correctly displaying on my monitor because my monitor is an sRGB. So these are out of gamut for my monitor. And as I change profiles, this will also change because this is how the color will change from the original to the profiled color. And the other one is this one. This one is basically showing the one on the right. This is showing colors that are out of gamut for our paper and our printer. So basically, this is telling us that with this particular paper, and if I go to Velvet Fine Art, we may get more or less, but this again depends on your exposure settings. But let's have a look. So certain colors like these, like that bright red, are out of gamut for our device. And yeah, I mean, let me just switch it on and off just so that you can see. Do you see the difference? On and off. Now, one possibility is that you could go, now that you know that there is a color mixer, you could go to the color mixer and go to those reds and tone them down. And as you can see, as we are changing that red, it's now beginning to be in gamut, right? It's permitted. But my advice is don't do that because nowadays we have such good quality conversions between the original image data, right, the raw data, and what's been sent to the printer, that you should still get a nice red, even though it may not be the 100% true red that you started with. But the conversion is now so good that you don't really, I would not recommend basically changing colors so that they print properly. That's basically what I'm saying. You should get a good correlation between the print and the original. But always remember that when you're printing, you're starting off with a huge amount of data that's on your computer, the high-res image, and then only a very small subset is being sent to the printer. So what you're doing here is that you are basically controlling that conversion to a print. Okay, so this is just soft proofing. So you wouldn't send the soft proof to the printer. You would send the original picture, right? You would send the original picture to the print. This is just to create a proof. But at the next session, sorry, on the fifth session, we will look at the print module and how you select these profiles when you are printing. So what we did now is just a soft proof, just a test, just to simulate how the picture will look.